as he would have said, for Thomas Elias Weatherly. So we'll have a little bit of celebration with the sadness. First, thank you to the Strand for hosting tonight's event. Thanks to Fred Bass, who is on another continent. Thank you to Emily Simpson, Michael Chin, Jay Gillespie. Thank you to Ken Jackowitz, a Strand alumnus, for all of his technical and other support. Thank you to all of tonight's readers and speakers. Thank you to Marilyn and Steve for the photos and video. Please silence your phones. Please silence your phones. Please silence your phones. I'm Janet Rosen. Most of you know me as Mrs. Weatherly number 4. I don't say that to be funny. I say that because he was an optimist. Not just a guy who said, oh, I was married once and that didn't work for me, I'm never doing that again. No, he kept trying, and he also had very profound relationships without benefit of legal or religious ceremony. Here is a brief story about poetry that I tried to tell at the funeral. In 1991, Paul Fussell published a pompous book called Bad, The Dumbing of America. There was a chapter on what he thought was bad poetry. It was clear that Fussell had just cherry-picked arbitrary lines from an anthology of modern poetry edited by Andrei Codrescu. Weatherly was furious. I am not a surrealist. I am an imagist. Read the entire poem and decide. We tucked that note with a copy of the offending poem in its entirety into the review copies of Bad at the Strand when no one was looking. Weatherly did not mind if you disagreed, but you had to offer an informed and intelligent opinion. Someone called Thomas Elias Weatherly the missing link between the imagists and the language poets. If it was one of you poets out there, please let me know. Or perhaps he said it himself, the way he said that he was hemi, semi-famous. He was also the best oxymoron. An edition of the Oxford Book of African American Writers cited him as an important minor poet. To everyone tonight, we know that he was important as a poet and as a person. Please welcome David Amram.
Just to say, it's so beautiful to see all of you here, people who were his family, people who we were his friends, some people also who were his students, and people who cared about him, and anybody that knew him for more than 5 minutes had their lives touched, whether they knew it or not. He was also extraordinary. In a city of 8 million egomaniacs, he was actually a modest person, even though he had more knowledge, more things than almost anybody, any of us had ever met. And he had the ability to always cut to the chase. After hours of hot air, he would sit, listen patiently. He would just nail it with something that was like a haiku, just the way he wrote them, beautiful little poems, and you'd look and say, wow. And then you'd reread them about 6 times and see there was something else that was said and something that was unsaid that made you think. And for those of us who were born into the Jewish faith, when he converted to Judaism, he reminded all of us about what we forgot about, which was what that was about, because he saw the spiritual and the intellectual part of that, and he appreciated all things that were spiritual and intellectual. And it was just a joy to know him, and as someone who also pursued what society would say is a hopeless cause, like trying to be a poet, trying to be a classical musician who also played jazz and improvised. He saw the relationship between the spontaneous and the formal, the high academy and the street, and the beauty of everyday life. So it's just so nice that he can be honored, and I'm sure a younger generation will get to appreciate him more. And I don't know how they judge major or minor poets. I don't think any of that matters, because with the internet, people are going to be able to read his poems, read about him, and even see maybe some things on YouTube that he did. And anybody that does that will feel the same as we did when we were younger, when we were with him. So in order to try to be brief, I'm a great follower of the New Orleans philosophy of the first to leave the battlefield and the last to leave the party. So I just got back from Quebec about 2 hours ago. I have to go play in an hour, so I'm going to play 2 little pieces just to celebrate Tom. And if he's listening at the moment, try to make it short. This is just my instrument from Chengdu, China, Humusai. I wrote in when I came back from China, so I finally got there. Found an instrument that just expressed that place, just as a poem can, just by the sound of what people played so long ago. So it's for Tom and for all of you. And the second will be little theme and variations on the Red River Valley. I beg pardon, on Amazing Grace, because usually at 3 a.m. in the morning when we were at the Mindset Bar, at the end of our heavy philosophic discussions, and everybody was done talking, Tom would say, David, why don't you play a tune? So this is a little theme and variations on Amazing Grace for Tom and for all of you. Thank you for doing this. Thank all of you for coming.
Thank you, David Amram. Next, we'll hear from Roseanne Wasserman, his longtime friend and also publisher.
Hi, everyone. It's been a pleasure to meet so many of you whom I've heard about so long, and to see old friends here again too. Although I wish you could be at a birthday party with Tom. I'm going to read a poem from the short history of the saxophone. There are some copies here at the Strand. If anyone hasn't got one, or let us know. They are also available at small press distribution, should you want a copy. They're very rare at this point, and they were never very numerous. We mostly gave them away, because I always feel like publishing the book is this form of a party, just one that lasts. I'm going to read his poem, Chaos Aglow. Chaos aglow begat night. Night begat sleep, dream, fates, death, destruction, the nemesis, and discord. The discord begat guilt, earth for heaven, Ammon, wills, doves, giddy, Dodona, oaks, leaves, sigh, godly ennui, sires, Helen, Aegis, Greek, Troas of love. It's a real short Trojan War. Done 2 words at a time. I have a long obit that I wrote, which was put up online at Best American Poetry's blog, and it's going to be reblogged so that more people, I think, can see it. There were lots of birthday wishes on Tom's Facebook yesterday, and one got the sense that the news hasn't reached people, and one does not know how to make that happen except one person at a time. So here's what I wrote, a very small piece of it. Sometime around July 15, we lost Tom Weatherly. His heart gave out. His fiancée, Linda Murphy, hadn't heard from him in a few days. No one had. Where were all his phone calls, emails, and posts? People heard from Weatherly. But he was gone alone in the big house he inherited from his mother, or with his sisters, and from his mother, near his birthplace of Scottsboro, Alabama. But we just heard from him the week before. He called and talked to our son twice. He talked to so many people. We had emails from him that we were about to reply to. Eclectic defined him, as did sudden turns at perpendicular angles. He called himself the grandson of Wallace Stevens and Hilda Doolittle, Jimmy Rogers and Sippy Wallace, and first cousin to Paul Blackburn. Sippy Wallace was a jazz singer and songwriter called the Texas Nightingale. Jimmy Rogers played with Muddy Waters. Blurbs from our short history of the saxophone book praise how his work condenses the wisdom of a life and vast readings into brilliantly compact music, as Andre Kudresky writes. Howard Cosell of the New York Daily News calls him that rarest of birds, a mystic with a sense of humor, a red-blooded American Zen master. going to read just one short anecdote from this, which is one of my favorite things I remember. Back in the early 1980s, when Eugene and I were living down here at NYU, Tom was living way down east at Hamilton Fish in an apartment with 2 bicycles hanging from bike hooks in the ceiling and bookshelf stacks marching through the entire studio room. This job was a deadly job for Tom. And he had a couch over by the front windows. He was also, besides books, of course, he was a bicycle evangelist who could talk anyone into buying one. Once upon a time, he accompanied me to an Alphabet City shop where he knew the staff well, and he outfitted a mixed tea frame for me with side panniers and a wide seat. Then we went riding out very early on a summer's morning, all the way west down to Houston, out to the Hudson River docks. On the way back, he bought a watermelon from a street vendor and bungee cord strapped it onto the front rack of his bike. And we took it home to Eugene for breakfast. I'm sure everybody's got stories like that, and I know people have poems also to share. So thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you, Roseanne. Please welcome a very important person in Weatherly's life, Ann McFall.
I met Tom in a funny story where I was at the Breslau Writers Conference, and I met a woman by the name of Madeline Tiger Bass. And Madeline told me this long story about this great black poet she knew. Tom Weatherly, she told me all about it, told me all about it. And then later on, I went to the National Poetry Conference at Grand Valley, Michigan, and found out that he was going to be there. So one night, I'm very hungover in the morning, after a drunken evening. I looked out the window and I saw him talking to someone in the street. I cracked open this window and I said, "You Tom Weatherly?" And he said, "Yeah, who wants to know?" I said, "My name is Ben McFall. We have a mutual friend." And he said, "Who's your mutual friend?" And I said, "Madeline Bass." He said, "Get down here right now." So I went downstairs and met him formally, and then later on he asked to see my poems, and I not reluctantly, I was really anxious to have anybody see them at that point because I've been writing on my own and not talking to anybody about them much. And I read him a poem, sort of a haiku. I didn't really know that he was such a master of a short form. And so I read him this poem, a haiku song. Stealing from home, my brother pays a poppy's rent with a view. And Tom read it aloud and understood the poem, which I thought was just wonderful. And he read this one to me, which he'd written, I think, to his grandmother after his grandfather passed. I'm home, babe, through. I'm home, through. Traveling through. I guess he has traveled through at this point. I got to meet him again here in the city, and he didn't have a job, and I told him to apply at Strand, because at that time, Fred and I were close enough for me to get somebody hired. Wesley applied for the job in town, Fred didn't hire him. And I said, "Well, why didn't you hire my friend?" He said, "Well, he seems overqualified for the job." I said, "He needs a job." And if you could, so Fred said, "Okay." Well, I said, go tell your friend that I'll hire him. So our friend Tom was living on First Avenue between like 11th and 13th, somewhere on the east side. And I went to the sidewalk and called up to him, "Weatherly, come back to the Strand, Fred will hire you." And he comes to the window and says, "Okay. And then he came and stayed for the whole 20 years. And it was a good thing to have done. I miss him a great deal. There's nobody quite like him. He was was as exasperating as fun, as much fun as exasperating. One time he came to my house in Tribeca, needing a place to spend the night. And right before we go to bed, he's sleeping in my roommate's bed, which is a high loft bed. And we had a tremendous argument about, he was espousing some libertarian views. And I was like, how could you, as a black boy, say that? And so he falls asleep, and he's like at eye level. And I just stand there and yell at him. Furious. He just pretended to sleep the entire time. Never moved. I just went to bed. I read with him in 1979 at the reading of a whole bunch of Strand people. I've only read like twice in the city, but this is the first time. It went over very well. And we've a cool Leslie Hope, who can't be here tonight. She's sort of infirm now. They met at that time, and they saw each other. It was just a really nice time to be interested in writing in the city. There was still, almost everybody here was interested in illustrating, either in a band or writing, or trying to be somebody, were somebody, not discovered yet. It was a really good time to be. That's pretty much all I want to say. I loved him, as we all do. I loved fighting with him. And when Danny sent me the message he was dead, we couldn't quite get over it because I had so much more to talk to him about and fight with him about. He's just to be missed forever, I guess. Except I have him here, and nobody can get to that. And I'm very happy about it. I'm happy that all you guys came tonight. Thank you.
Paul, that was so beautiful. Gilda Conrad will read a poem sent in by one of Thomas Elias Weatherly's former students, Louise Nair. He was a big fan of Gilda's performance when he was alive, so Gilda will be reading all of the notes sent in from women who could not be here tonight. Gilda Conrad reading Louise Nair.
Thank you. This is for Thomas Weatherly and our class at St. Mark's in the Bowery, 1971. Tall, handsome Pied Piper, we followed you to drab church rooms, made alive by love. Of sounds and cadence, we followed you to your Brooklyn home through a maze of streets. You are the leader, music, line breaks, beats, spilling into the air, made electric by you. And me, 21 years young and old, so desperately wanting to be a poet, to expiate my pain, to string words together, luminescent pearls. Tom, a mix of sounds and spirit, noises rising from glistening minerals in concrete. You gave us our voices, you gave us the sky. You helped me to not be afraid to speak the truth. Tom, we follow you still from the concrete of New York City, across a continent of leafy trees, to wherever you are, Pied Pipers still singing, gathering poets to your loving grace. Louise Nair has continued to dedicate her life to writing and teaching since that first workshop with Tom. She is the author of 2 books of poetry, Keeping Watch and The Houses Are Covered in Sound. She co-authored How to Bury a Goldfish, 113 Rituals for Everyday Life. She's been a long-time teacher at City College of San Francisco. Thank you.
Thank you. Please welcome Carolyn Weatherly, his first one. I brought copies of
4 poems that Tom wrote. The first one is from Mau Mau American Cantos. It's called Pair Bond. What is heart is untransplantable, is not the house we move in, home to. Caroline, your ears in the wind, hear me, speak to home. This one is also from Mau Mau American Cantos, and it's one of my favorites of his. To Old Elm in Cemetery for Confederate Dead. The pine fragrance, the magnolia graveyard, surround a gnarled old elm. Among conferences of silence, honors heaped upon dead men, it stands to document the wind, not their deeds. Leaves fall, journalistic season, past historic years. Listen to elm bark in passage of Dixie-landed gentry. It makes no gesture of sound. Round its trunk, children chant their games over buried roots. Elm roots grow through graves, neither desecrate nor revere. Crack the skulls open to brace against the wind. Owl watch, perched in what dark limbs, silent, swaying with the wind. This poem is from Natural Process, an anthology. Crazy What She Calls is the title. It's much harder to treat a woman than it is to treat a man. We are allowed to mix piss in the toilet. Thought we had to be married for that, but no, one will care, even if we declare our unmarriage. Marriage fucking our heads, together, apart. More than when we ate 3 breakfasts in the hip bagel. I was the rapist, but you were the villain. White Romanian Jew, Samuels. Didn't your family change its name? Marshmallow mattress on a putty frame. You thought, who was that tall, dark, handsome stranger? Bullshitter. Hey, that's not a street light, that's the moon. And to say something about this one, we were both stoned out of our minds on lidocaine acid and making love on a mattress on the floor. And I said, this mattress feels like a marshmallow. And he said, marshmallow mattress on a putty frame. And we both cracked up because that's exactly what it felt like. So that's where that line came from. And the last one was also from Natural Process, titled Pool Dews Aid. Mudcat Shango, his black pitch, attitude in state of grace, in the heart of the mountain. Lion Seidel, devil grin on, off fightin' the lower Heaven Expressway. Ishmael Reed's bony mushrooms, shit-faced on moonseed. Spookin' greens, black-dyed peas. Peach tree panes swished. How it was with catfish gravy, acoustical blue guitar. And we spent our honeymoon on Calle España, Old San Juan tours, paved with anvil petals, Lil Tomcat shooting his shit in your veins, varicose tracks in your legs. Out of Scorpio and Pisces, fucked his way out of your pussy, is awake now. This hard dick morning for me, the lil mother sucker won't even leave corners in your tits. He's the balance of our days. You looking like a grandma, pinch his foreskin. We will die venerable, like pretty.
in case anyone wasn't aware, Carolyn is also the mother of Thomas Elias Weatherly III, sometimes known as T3 or Tom or Tommy, and he's the tiny infant that Thomas is holding in one of those pictures. It'll come around again. Eugene Ritchie, the poet and educator Eugene Ritchie.
It's wonderful to hear you read those poems, Caroline. Carolyn, some of them a little too X-rated for anybody else. Now, I was looking through the poems trying to figure out which ones to read, and Salty Gal is one that seemed it would be good to hear. Salty Gal. The apartment is 2 rooms, no boudoir for you. If I forget yourself, if you must remember it, sit to the window, watch red, white, blue smokestacks on Avenue D. Steam and smoke. Changes, a small room. Claws and horns in, to conflict at the water hole, at the salt lick. These panes may be walls from the outside and come back into me, opening, a dark day smiling. One season's change from a nondescript. Our bedroom is 2 windows. I met Tom at David Ignato's class in 1974 at Columbia University, where we were both getting our MFAs. And we went after the first class down to the Brass Rail on Broadway and had some beers with Jonathan Cohen, who's still translating and writing poems, and Billy St. Clair, who's also writing poems. And had a great time, and I didn't hear much about him for a little while. And then suddenly one day, Billy called up and said, "Can you believe it? It was 3 o'clock in the morning, and he was coming to my door, and I said, 'Hi, Tom, come on in.' And what he wanted to do was to read poems to each other for the rest of the night, which he did until the dawn. Very common kind of arcane thing that he liked to do. And I lived after that wondering if he was ever going to show up in the middle of the night at my apartment. Second poem I wanted to read was Autobiography, which is also from Mau Mau, American Cantos. Autobiography. Tomcat, born on Railroad Avenue, Scottsboro, Alabama, to Big Tom and Lucy Bell, Weatherly, November 3, 1942. Dad in European theater, Mom and I living with his mom and dad. After the war, Dad and Mom and little sis and I moved to the mountain, street home, grade in high school at George Washington Carver, split off to Morehouse College at the end of 11th grade, 2.5 years at Morehouse, semester at Alabama A&M, then Paris Island and Dante's Inferno, another semester at Normal. Alabama made Q frat sick with bundled sticks in hand, indefinitely suspended from A&M for publishing The Saint on campus without permission. Had a vision, entered AME ministry, assistant pastor of St. Paul's, Scottsboro, and next year pastor of church great-granddad pastored. Bishop I.H. Bonner had field for tradition. Had a division, left God, mother, hooded youth, and the country for New York. Lived on streets, parks, hitched to the States, dishwasher at hip bagel, waiter in the mountains, cook at Lion's Head, proofreading, copy editing, baking, bellhopping, camp counselor, dealing, fucked up in the head, ranted in the St. Mark's Poetry Project, ranting now in Afro-Hispanic Poets Workshop, East Harlem, holder of the double mojo hand and 13th degree, gree black belt. And I just wanted to say how wonderful it is to be here with all of you, and especially Tom's family. He's a great friend of my wife Roseanne and I, and my son Joseph. From the very day Joseph was born, he was at his bris shortly afterwards, and also became very good friends with my son and with his girlfriend Priscilla Gonzalez, who's here tonight. And it was really a rare honor and beautiful experience to have been able to be with him. I still have a wonderful last voicemail that he left on my cell phone, which I listen to every now and then, because he told me and my wife not to fail those kids. He said, don't give them Fs, they work too hard. I think that's a really great idea.
Gee, Richie, Linda Murphy has prepared something that will be read by Lorraine Stone Thomas.
Greetings. Before I delve into what Linda has prepared, it's only two short things. I have to say that Linda asked me to come and be with her and be her support in being here, because she felt very shaky. Thomas was a big deal to her for a long time, as he was a big deal to many people for a long time. I never got to meet Thomas, except through Linda, and except through all of you tonight, and I am eternally grateful. Thank you so much. This first poem is not by Thomas, not by me, but it's by Nikki Giovanni, and it is a very clear statement of love, and this is Linda's way of sharing some of that love with you. I wrote a good omelet. I wrote a good omelet and ate a hot poem after loving you. Buttoned my car and drove my coat home in the rain after loving you. I goed on red, stepped on green, floating somewhere in between being here and there after loving you. I rolled my bed, turned down my hair, slightly confused, but I didn't care. Laid out my teeth and gargled my gown, then I stood and laid me down to sleep after loving you. In Linda's own words, some people refer to him as Thomas, T-E-W, Tom, or Weatherly. I knew Junior. Junior shared popsicles with me, read me stories, and pushed me in my grandmother's porch swing. When I was a teenager in Philadelphia, he would visit our family often. Before he was ever published, he would read his poems to me. I was the sounding board, I was the critic. On Sunday afternoons, he would take me to a matinee at the Showboat Jazz Lounge, even though I was far too young to be there. Some Sundays, my friends and I would take our allowances, take the train to New York to be in the village with Junior. In recent years, he helped me through a long and debilitating illness. Junior was kind, patient, gentle. He referred to me as his Alabama gal. His obituary stated I was his fiancée, and that's true. But he was so much more. He was my friend. We laughed together, cried together, and shared so many experiences. He said I was the constant in his life, and he was the constant in mine. I will always be his Alabama gal, and he will always be my junior. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you so much for that. The poet and one of Weatherly's closest friends, Bert Kimmelman.
Hi, everyone. I can't remember. Hi, David. How you doing? I can't remember if it was 1966 or 67, the first year the Poetry Project was really up and running. But I met Tom because he was a part of the very first poetry workshop headed up by Joel Oppenheimer. And it was one of those 2 years. And I went to a workshop session, and I and Tom always would drink or whatever, go around. And for me, it was amazing because what was going on there at the Poetry Project was astonishingly and utterly new and incredibly vivid and powerful and meaningful. And I use the word new, thinking of it as your Pound's phrase, make it new. Tom knew Pound's work extremely well, along with other modernists like H.D. particularly, and very well-read person. And then we had a friendship all this time. Of all those people in that workshop, and I would even go so far as to say, of all the people sort of writing in New York maybe then, Tom had the greatest command and the greatest intuition about language, command of and intuition of language. His precision was unequaled, and I think maybe it still is. And his intelligence and musical sense, which came together in his poems, was amazing. And it's always, his work has always been, for me, a paradigm I've aspired to. And I want to just say, I'm sort of ad-libbing here. I want to say also that if he's mentioned in some book as a minor poet, in part, I would say that's because he was such a purist that, his poems really were not easy in a certain sense. They were challenging because of their rigor and because he just cut right to the essentials. And that's part of why I think he might be listed in certain places as a minor poet. Also, I think he was such a purist that at a certain point, having, it's hard to imagine this now, but if you go back to, let's say, the 60s, early 70s, he was being very successful then as a poet. And I think, I don't know exactly what happened, that he just didn't want to play the poetry game or the publishing game or whatever, but he just was going to go his own way and do do what he wanted to do when he wanted to do it, you know. I think the words rebel, which is a key word, it often comes up in poems, and eclectic, you know, that describes him. I also would say he had an incredible passion for life, and he was the most individualistic person I can think of, or maybe I've ever known. And you know, I don't know what happened with Judaism, whether he finally liked the rules of Judaism or what, but you know, he was a rule breaker, but he did it out of conviction. You know, his libertarianism maybe was part of that. He shouldn't say this, but you know, he put out this anthology, Natural Process, which, by the way, I was at a panel at the AWP conference a couple years ago, and there was a Lorenzo Thomas panel, a marvelous panel, some really sharp people, some scholars and poets, and that anthology came up. And the reverence with which that anthology was treated by those people was really something. So, you know, Tom occupies a place in our literary history. But I was in that anthology. And when he asked me for poems, and I'm not under my name, Kimmelman, you know, but, you know, I used the name of my girlfriend at the time, first initials and then her last name. And I said to him, really? He says, oh yeah, you're black. So, of course, I'm not black, you know, but that, you know, he made his own way. You know, he went his own way with everything. And I remember, Carolyn, I remember visiting you guys. I think this was probably before Tom was born, Tomcat was born. You know, it was like, I think you had an apartment, it was like east of Avenue B, it was East Fifth Street. I came up there and the two of you like sitting there naked and somebody's painting you, you know, some portrait, you know. It's like, all right, what that maybe was the East Village then, you know, or the, whatever. Anyway, he was a one of a kind, and I'll always miss him. He was a pain in the ass sometimes, you know. He could argue and loved arguing, but that was part of why I did and do love him. I want to read just a few poems that are endearing to me and I think show off his poetics and his abilities as a precisionist in some ways. And it's unfortunate that I have to read them because I think at one and the same time, you know, you look at his poems on the page and they work, no matter how you hear them, you know. But there was nothing like hearing the poems when he read them. And those poems were written ultimately in a way for his voice and his intonations, his rhythms and so forth. So obviously I can't do justice. Anyway, I'm going to read some favorites of mine, and I'll go chronologically. So this is an early poem called To John Wieners. These men I've kissed and wrestled love from, satisfied the spirit of the act, but not the drama of weighing down weight. The tension of fucking springs to. Your eyes are mirth. Your eyes are mirth, trauma. I am he, born out of the laughter of your sleep. Your sleep closed to me, traps me inside it. Waking in the morning of joy, I am ignorant and stretch my shape. And you awakening, pull me close. It's a great Alba. I don't know if you know that genre, the Alba, but it's, you know, the dawn song. Lovers, or, you know, classically, you know, they're disturbed by the light of the morning. Anyway. Untitled. Fishes, theirs fit, people fidget, taught theirs fulfill.
wishes, lies, and fitful dreams. So now I'm not going to be able to channel Tom, but this is glory. Tom Weatherly seems been born full of red eye and corny jokes as stale as morning mouth on grade B porno sound stage, all forlorn hope shooting blanks. He's horny for you, cheap peach, corn silk on his breath and moon, shine on you, clingstone, poontang. Thank you.
You know, you can really see a progression in the poetry from the early works where there was a lot of experiment with the vernacular and the later poems, which can only be described as lapidary. Okay, next. Gilda Conrad will read a letter from Barbara Hodgin.
I'd like you to know, yes. Barbara Hodgin would like you to know that she is a friend in doxy, which is a word Thomas enjoyed, and she is now living in California. And she says, if not for Thomas, I would have missed out on many things in life. The poetry of HD, the music of Professor Longhair, a lot of bad karate movies in Times Square, and the list could go on and on. Mostly, I would have missed knowing and loving this complex, passionate, magical soul who changed my life forever. I would also have missed Strega. Thomas told me that according to legend, when you drink a glass of Strega with someone, you will be united with that person forever. We drank Strega together. Godspeed, Thomas-sama. See you on the other side.
Thank you. That was from Barbara Hodgin. Sunny Stone.
First of all, I don't speak very well in front of groups, so bear with me. I feel it. Okay, I had a bit of an unusual relationship with Tom, and I wrote these words the day he passed, and then I'm going to read the poem when I'm done. I'm extremely heartbroken. I always thought Tom would be the one to live to be 110. He was larger than life in more ways than one. Tom wasn't just a father, a brother, and a friend to me. He was my hero. Meeting Tom in 1967 on the streets of the East Village was kismet. I was a 14-year-old damaged soul, and he offered me shelter. But what he gave me was much, much more. Living on the streets back then, I was constantly dodging pimps, rapists, pedophiles, the runaway police, and mommy dearest. Unfortunately, not always successful. Tom became instrumental in my recovery to becoming a born-again human. I remember Tom's small apartment in Alphabet City was wallpapered with probably hundreds of tiny papers with all kinds of poetry, writing, and art doodlings on them, as well as he had an actual American flag for a rug. He knew it would take a village, so he introduced me to my other heroes, Nikki Hitz Etzen, Ron Etzen, Michael Gregory Stevens, and a few other very special people who all equally helped to care for me and helped turn me into the person destiny meant me to be. I was showered with a life of culture, literary knowledge, poetry, magnificent art, the mind-blowing music of the 60s, and most important, love, something that had been missing in my life. My beautiful heroes did this at great risk to themselves. Tom wrote a few beautiful poems for me. My favorite was Peanut Butter Fly. I will admit, at the time, I didn't get his poetry, but so what? I still thought they were groovy. He used to tell me I reminded him of Diane DePrema, probably because we were both free spirits and had the same crazy hair. One day, very soon, I will finish my book about my life with my Lower East Side heroes. In fact, I think it was my last phone conversation with Tom where we discussed some things that maybe I shouldn't put in the book. But then we both thought about it and decided to just go for it. There is no one on this planet that can fill Tom's boots because he most definitely is the rarest dancing star of them all. He will be missed by many, and I will love and miss Tom forever. Okay, Peanut Butter Fly from Thumbprint. Let me see you boogie woogie. I know shitmongers who survived. Cherry pink and apple blossom white, peanut butter cunts with sapphire blood, nappy mouth, blue-eyed, boogieing cold turkey.
For years, I urged him to write a memoir. It doesn't have to be your whole life. It doesn't have to be all your wives, your girlfriends. It can start when you get on the bus from Alabama, and it's about being in New York, the arts, the East Village, the poetry scene. I begged him to do this years before Patti Smith published her memoir, by the way. I said, people will be interested in this. It will revive your poetry reputation. But he was a procrastinator. He wouldn't write a book proposal or sample chapters. He insisted he had to write the entire thing first. But that was just the way he was. I'm still waiting for him to change a light bulb that I asked about some time ago. His daughter, Regina Nicholson, has sent in something that I'm going to read now. Mr. Thomas E. Weatherly, Jr., words for a father from his daughter, Regina R. Nicholson. Today is what would be the 72nd anniversary of my father, Mr. Thomas E. Weatherly, Jr.'s day of birth. He is no longer present with us in body, but he is still here. Thomas Weatherly was like a mighty oak tree to me. I would often tease my father, saying, "You are going to live to become a crotchety old man." Thank you for celebrating my father's life at the place he was so fond of during his career. I am sorry I am not there in person, but you know you are all in my thoughts and prayers for being such a wonderful part of my father's life. My father will always be in my heart and the hearts of his granddaughters, Shelby and Taylor. This morning, Taylor, Shelby, and I sang happy birthday to my father, Pa Weatherly, and their grandpa. We prayed for him as we usually do each day, as well other family and friends. Shelby stated, "God wanted Grandpa home." Taylor stated, "We really miss Grandpa." My heart broke and I had to turn away so they wouldn't see my tears. The Grand Gals and his gene pool buddies, as my father preferred to call them, miss Grandpa so much. Shelby and Taylor loved having Grandpa bounce them on his knee, play with them, read to them, make his homemade wheat pancakes with fruit and honey, and keep Mommy from disciplining them. Because in his eyesight, the Grand Gals are never wrong. They sprang from his forehead, as he liked to say. It gave me joy to give him the gift of grandchildren. When I was younger, I thought my father was weird. Cool, but weird, and sometimes just weird. Many people in Jackson County, Alabama, talk about how my father was the most intelligent and smart person ever to live in the area. It was a bit intimidating to have a father with such a high IQ. I looked forward to the books on many topics he would send me. I looked forward to my visits north and his visits south. We lived different lives, but he helped me expand my mind and my world. During our talks, my father often told me about his various experiences. As a child, I didn't always understand my father's life in New York City or his views. We chose to concentrate on our similarities. During my teenage years, I understood him better. As I grew older, I realized we were more alike than I thought. Stubborn Scorpios, independent to a fault, who love our family and friends, and who are loyal to family and friends. We also shared a love of reading, music, activism, and political commentary. My father gave me the best family anyone could ask for in life. Grandparents Thomas and Lucy Weatherly, my little brother T3, Aunt Yvonne, moms Carolyn, Michal, and Janet, and other family members and friends. I miss having political and religious discussions with my father. He would often tell me, "You are the wisest person I know." Not true, for he was very wise people, but it was nice to hear from my father. It was nice to hear he was proud of me. I was proud of him. During an especially rough time in my life, when I was laid off from my job 3 years ago, I was so depressed, I literally could not get out of bed. My father fed me, held me while I cried in his arms, nurtured me, and took care of Taylor and Shelby until days later I realized I have to get over this and get moving. Not once did he judge me or scold me. He knew I had to grieve the loss. He kept me strong, positive, and helped give me strength to reclaim my career. The biggest loss I feel is I have lost half of me. Someone who would go to the end of the earth to hunt down anyone who would hurt me or his grand gals. He was going to teach Shelby and Taylor Hebrew. I heard especially for them because they won't completely know the Thomas Weatherly I know. I miss my oak tree. I miss my gene pool buddy. I miss debating him. I miss my father. I just simply miss him. The best way I can honor him is to live my life as he did, on his own terms, not being afraid. I will raise Shelby and Taylor to always remember their grandpa and how much he loved and cherished them. I pray someday the world can know the true genius of my father, Thomas Weatherly, Jr. Here is a poem by Thomas Weatherly. You die for freedom. You die for good. You die for reason. You die for good. You die for God. You die for good. Weatherly, 022-712-0537. That indicates the date and time that he completed that poem. Gina is also one of the smartest people I know, by the way. Thank you, Regina, for sending this and letting me read. Joseph Ritchie, who is the poet and also the son of Roseanne Wasserman and Eugene Ritchie.
Many people knew Tom as a great teacher as well as a great friend, and he was always that to me, and was always encouraging me. In fact, he was the first person I ever read with, and I think I've only read in front of people 3 times. And he would always, I'm sure as he would with everybody, send, what he was working on, what he was doing. And one of my favorite things that he would send me was audio recordings of him reading his poems. And there was one of him reading Wall-E that I had on my iPod when I was in high school and I used to listen to all the time. And whenever I think of his voice or him, I just hear eclectic blues guitar echoing in my head. And I mean, that sense of sound in poetry is or Kimmelman said, is really an amazing gift that he gave to people. So I'm going to read Wall-E from Short History of the Saxophone, and then a couple other ones that sonically haunt me to this day. And I'm kind of going to try to read them how he read them, because I know how particular and how important sound was for him. but in my voice still, which he always said poems should be read out loud. I never stop now. When I first read at home, kind of saying it under my breath, even if people look at me like I'm crazy. Anyway, okay, Wally. Never muted heart, eclectic blues guitar, roots toward Wild West, art invention the fools, meant to true the heart, invent improvement arts, martyrs choose a heaven, meant to true the heart, in death brutes reward, an artful Western music, meant to true the heart, tulip petal larvae, eclectic blues guitar, never muted heart, eclectic blues guitar, artsy belly tunes, ablutions Western art, hoodoo barred from heaven, eclectic blues guitar, never muted heart, eclectic blues guitar, hard on belly groove, move your heady arse, hoodoo barred from heaven, levy music darky, eclectic blues guitar, every movie darky, eclectic blues guitar. This one, simple, honest speech, is something that, just that phrase, I really always admired. He always said, because somebody who can wed their poetry with their ethics, I think is a very rare ability that he had. It's an amazing wholeness. I think it's very admirable. Anyway, simple, honest speech, bright simile awaked, flower symbol blooms, father, mother, rhythm, body's earthy singer, Thomas, son of Thomas, repots flower tropes, simple, honest speech, people forgot within, earthy rhythm bodies. This last one, Human Never Knows, which is one of the ones he dedicated to me. And I always felt kind of influenced by, and for somehow Human Never Knows, eclectic blues guitar, simple, honest speech, those things are always just, I think they might even have the same meter just echoing in my head. Like things that I have to remember, and that anyone should remember about living. You never know. Simple, honest speech. And I guess eclectic blues guitar isn't really ethical, but I don't know. Something about way of being. Human never knows. Brute tuber tribe. Dirty truth. Underground roots. Every dying bloom. I think I'll always remember the kinds of things he tried to teach me, and to have that kind of direct experience of a poet who you love and who's influenced you so much is a really rare privilege. And I thank him for that. Thank you all.
Thank you, Joseph. Steve Freed.
Updike says in Perfection Wasted. And another regrettable thing about death is the ceasing of your own brand of magic. Gertrude Stein called Ezra Pound, quote, a village explainer. Excellent if you were a village, but if you were not. And Weatherly was a village explainer too, and it was excellent because we were a village, not in space, but in time. As to some of us, he irregularly but emphatically pronounced and even explicate principles. I remember especially two of the most useful for me. One was that haiku weren't Western tropes with coupled tenors and vehicles, but fusions of yoked images whose synthesis created a jarringly enlightening third presence. And he also convinced me that George Wallace, the segregationist governor of Alabama, would not have made a worse 35th president than John Kennedy. I'm grateful for and convinced of both to this day. But back to death, where we all are right now. When the haiku master Matsuo Basho, whom Tom and I both admired, and whose translations of whose works Tom encouraged me to continue working on. When he was dying in 1694, his followers asked him for a death poem. And he demurred, saying that he had written every poem since his masterpiece, the Old Pond Haiku of 13 years before, as a death poem. However, upon awakening, Basho had dreamed and wrote this poem, his last, Tabindi Yande, Yumiwak Hanin no Wo, Hakim Guru, which I translate, sick on a trip, what dreams dance withered fields? This story brings together for me three threads: found poem, dream poem, and death poem, all of which connect to some of my last correspondence with Tom via two pieces of writing which I feel significantly enlarge his canon. On 15 February this year, he wrote me, Steve, I awoke one morn and wrote the attached, not going to revise. I wouldn't know if it's possible. And here's what he wrote. Old Seth Andrews' boy died twice when he discovered he weren't alive in 1942's, just been born in 1973, so he sets about digs his grave, because he figures a man should lay easy even if you can't find his body. Where was his body laid to rest? In some unknown plot, like a missed soldier unknown and unmourned by his loved ones, back here in Jackson County, where his bones lay in unfleshed, as yet his ma and pa couldn't say. Mysteries abound, into mysteries abundant. He wondered aloud to his family, fellows, folk, took to look, scans at him, all the times he dead walks to where he digs his grave. How is the died man supposed to live alive when there's no body, nobody in his grave? How behave when nobody says how he lives with the rotten fact of that in his lips, in his mouth? So is how he feels. No one in town helps him dig. They just stand, watch. For what, as far as I know, is Tom's sole prose fiction. And later, on the 4th and 5th of July, in a correspondence of his, over this photograph of mine, I'd given him, and then he given back to me, he provided details of who was in it as follows. Left to right, Roseanne Wasserman, half my publishers, Muriel Michal Hollander, third wife, and Marilyn Kagan. That's my wife, the creator of the film you will see. Roseanne and husband, Eugene Ritchie, were in Columbia U's graduate writing program with me. When Ignatow was out, he had me run class. I subtly and clever brainwashed them with belief my poems worth publishing in future. I also foresaw events in future. And then he wrote, marked as poetry by a line break, one of striking originality in that preceded a period, to which I've added his title of that correspondence, the following. The power of three. I predict I'll die. See how good I am at that? Those three women. Lovely.
from Alabama, Clyde Broadway, has sent in a note. Some of you might have already read it on Facebook. It will now be read by Ken Jackowitz.
You'll have to pardon me, please. I'm not one of those people that read this on Facebook, but I will do my best to do justice. Clyde Broadway is an artist who lives in Scottsboro, Alabama. He is known mostly for his narrative paintings, examining social and cultural subjects, and especially for the paintings of Elvis and Jesus and Robert E. Lee, which appeared in the New York Times in November 2003, and several other publications since then. In the late spring or early summer of 1967, I had dropped out of art school at Auburn University, gone to New York City, and ended up at an intermediary school in Woodstock, New York called Group 212. This was a somewhat free-form school based roughly on the principles of Black Mountain College. I was attending a poetry workshop there, conducted by Joel Oppenheimer, and one day he asked me where I was from. I told him Scottsboro, Alabama. He repeated the name, Scottsboro. Do you know a fellow named Thomas Weatherly? He's about your age. He's in my poetry workshop at St. Mark's in the Bowery. I think he told me he is from Scottsboro? No, I replied. I don't think I ever met him. The summer passed and then the fall, and school was over until the next spring. As everyone was saying their goodbyes and preparing to go their separate ways, Joel issued an invitation to everyone to come look him up at the Lions Head Tavern back in New York City. In the city one night, after I had finished eating dinner with my friend, the painter Donald Cole, at a restaurant somewhere in Little Italy, we walked out to the street discussing how to spend the rest of the evening. Suddenly Don said, I know what we can do. Why don't we try to find Joel Oppenheimer? Where was it he said to look him up? The Lions Head on Christie Street, I recalled. We agreed it would be a dandy thing to do, and we wandered around seemingly every crooked street in Greenwich Village until we spotted the sign over the door and the steps down to the half-subterranean tavern with dimly glowing lights. Inside the bar room was comfortably full of people, but not too crowded, and we quickly spotted Joel holding court at the bar. He welcomed us, and after a few minutes of reunion celebration and congratulating us for finding the place, he turned to me and asked again, Say, didn't you tell me you're from Scottsboro, Alabama, and that you don't know Tom Weatherly? Yeah, that's right. I don't think I do, I answered. Oppenheimer turned his head, flagged our waitress, and asked her, Is Tom here tonight? She said, Yes, I think he's in the kitchen. To which Joel replied, Tell him to come out here for a minute. She hurried through the door and disappeared. A few minutes later, the kitchen door swung open and a tall young black man walked over to where we were standing. Joel Oppenheimer looked at us and said, You two fellows have a lot in common. And he proceeded to introduce two Scottsboro boys to each other, 1,000 miles away from their own hometown. It was a moment that was forever crystallized in our consciousness, and one we would revisit often in conversations for years to come. We both knew instantly why we had never met. There was no mystery. During our youth, we had attended school in the segregated South. The school started integrating the year after I graduated from the whites-only Scottsboro High, and long after Thomas had attended the blacks-only George Washington Carver School, where his father was the principal. Because of that imposed separation of the races, it was unlikely that Tom and I would ever cross paths in Scottsboro. We lived at opposite color-coded sides of town. In fact, I didn't live in town at all, but 3 miles out in what was then the country. My father owned a construction company with which he did anything that was humanly possible with a small collection of heavy equipment, and he did it better than anybody else alive. That night at the Lions Head, Tom invited Tom Cole and me to come over to his apartment to show us some of his poetry. I don't remember how we got there, but for the rest of the night, Tom read his poetry and talked about his life and his family back in Scottsboro. After that night, I didn't stay much longer in New York. By December, I had run out of reasons for being there, and I decided to finish my BFA at Auburn. After completing my degree, I began teaching art at the junior college near Scottsboro in 1972, the year after my father died. I went to Atlanta to attend graduate school at Georgia State for an MFA that was mandatory to keep the job. After I got the MFA, however, I decided to stay in Atlanta. That night at the Lion's Head was the last time I heard from Thomas Weatherly until sometime after I returned from Atlanta to our old hometown in 1996 to be the caregiver for my 90-year-old mother, who had fallen and broken her hip. The hip replacement surgery was successful, and she lived 8 more years. One evening, not long after I'd returned home, the telephone rang. It was Tom Weatherly. Tom had obtained my phone number from Stephen Serberg, a mutual friend in Atlanta. We talked for quite a while that night, catching up with each other's lives, but I needed to end the conversation to help my mother. It was only the first of many more such phone calls, sometimes 2 or 3 a month during the next 17 years. Several years after that first phone call, Tom returned to Alabama to be the caregiver for his own mother, as I had for mine. So our experiences paralleled again, and the calls and conversations became more frequent. The last one was a week before he died. We talked about nearly everything. Politics and racial issues were usually at the top of Tom's favorite list of subjects. Religion was up there too. I said something about this the last time we talked, and he told me he did this because he was trying to understand these things better, and our conversations helped him to do it. He said, I could talk with you about these things because you're honest with me about them. Another recurring theme was his family. He honored and greatly respected his parents, his father's wisdom, intelligence, and importance in the city. He was proud of his antecedents, especially his grandmother, Mary Hunter, also a school principal, for whom a street and public housing project in Scottsboro are named. And he often spoke lovingly of his children and grandchildren and sent me pictures of them. Conversations with Thomas were hard to end because he was interested in so many things. One topic would often segue into another, and another, and another, until after talking with him for more than a couple of hours, I just couldn't deal with anymore. And I have to admit that to him. His interests were not just eclectic. I think they were comprehensive. He once told me that he read the entire Compton's Encyclopedia when he was 8 years old. Tom Weatherly was his own Google. We often argued, but usually I was more interested in Tom's special insight than I was in defending my own point of view. I knew I wasn't going to learn anything by doing the talking. One other thing we frequently talked about was our first meeting that night at the Lion's Head, when Joel Oppenheimer introduced us. I had often thought about our first meeting in the years following, but Tom shed new light on it for me by sharing his own reactions, as well as related details. He especially resented the delight Oppenheimer had seemed to take later on in rubbing in the circumstances that had kept us from meeting before we got to New York. While we resented those circumstances himself, he was frustrated by the lack of understanding of the whole of Southern culture by outsiders who imposed their generalizations on it. But now there won't be any more conversations. I immediately started missing him when I first heard the news of his death. I had a crazy urge to call him and ask him all about it. And ever since I started writing this, I wish I could call him to confirm details, read what I had written, and ask for his feedback. His time might have run out, but Thomas never did. We still had a lot more to talk about. I still had a lot more I wanted to ask him. And he still had a lot more to say to me and to us all. Live Broadway, July 20th, 2014.
Thank you. I think that was Weatherly interrupting us. You know, he did like to fool around with technology and get the last word. Okay, Jean. Yes, Gina will read some comments that Weatherly had posted on the blog American Conservative about poetry.
I forgot to mention that my copy of Mama American Cantos, there is a date after he signed it and dedicated it to Roseanne, actually, gave it to her. The date is 1971. It was published in 1970. And the funny thing about that is we didn't meet him until 1974. And then I realized, actually, only tonight, that the date is not only 1971, it's November 3rd, 1971. His sense of humor was relentless. These are comments from his blog, American Conservative.
He posted it on somebody else's blog.
Oh, okay, you're right, yes. Thank you very much. From the blog, American Conservative, I remember that. I'm an old man. Attended St. Mark's Poetry Project workshops when they were free. You were often surprised by visits from poets you read, liked, and studied. Some were famous, some were good, and you had access. The first magazines we were published in were Mimeo and Staple. Some of those are classics of a sort, collected, and included some of the good and the known. I wrote, imitated, studied homemaking, prosody, discussed prosody with friends, and learned. We didn't have time to judge the health of poetry. I don't believe such a beast exists. There are poets, some good, some mediocre, and some bad. It often depends on the most whimsical reasons which ones fit into one or more of the categories. I guess I've done okay. Some books published by folk who thought them worth something even paid me a bit. I've taught in some colleges, high schools, and lower. I've taught at St. Mark's. I've washed dishes, waited tables, cooked, managed shipping department of bookstore, drove trucks, mopped floors, wrote a column, copy edited, proofread, and other jobs to pay rent and buy food. So sometimes I made some money from poems directly and indirectly, yet I tried to improve as a poet, and though nice to make money from it, that wasn't foremost in my brain. Indulge in masturbators' discussions of the health of poetry instead of doing it with a real poem. I will work on the health of my poems. I'm not clever enough to judge the poetry and poets and poems of a whole diverse culture.
Ben McFall will read some remarks written by Thomas Weatherly's first cousin, James Willard Pope. James Willard, like Weatherly, is idiosyncratic with his language.
And I'm not sure I can bring them to life because I haven't met James, but I'll try. Thomas E. Weatherly was my oldest cousin and brother. He always had something going on, either reading, creating, or writing a short story. He taught me many things and always made sure I remembered what was taught. We played countless board games, and sometimes they went on for weeks. I can remember the first time I came to New York City. Must have been 11 or 12. He met me at the bus station, and we walked. Stopped by NYU and saw our Aunt Dee Dee Smith, there working on her PhD in mathematics. From there, it was on to the Lion's Head, bar, eatery, where all the newspaper and writers hung out. It was the bomb for a young boy from the South. Read where it closed down a few years back. Thomas did many things in life. I want to remember the good, bad, ugly. I was in Mobile, Alabama when I got the call that he'd gone over to the other side. I had spoken with him the week before. We always talked Spanish. We never saw this coming. I am still somewhat shell-shocked, but still wondering. To sum it up, I will be at peace when we are all together, laughing, enjoying, and watching all of our new little children growing up. Rest in peace, Thomas E. Weatherly Jr., James W. Floyd.
Thank you. A remembrance and poem by Megan Buckley will be read by Gilda Conrad.
Okay. Megan says, I haven't written anything in far too long. This is what happens when you stop working with Weatherly. Not good. But here is a poem that I wrote over here that he liked. And you know how hard it was, and probably still is, to please him. The second thing below that, which I'm looking at, he wrote, of course, there's no doubt about that. It's immediately identifiable as Weatherly. Where it comes from is he sent me an exercise, and whatever it was I didn't do very well because he sent me this example of what he meant me to do. And it's incredibly typical W and also incredibly sweet, which I think is a good way of summing up his very difficult self. Also, I had a dream about him a couple days ago. Someone said to me, let's see Weatherly. And I said skeptically, all right, thinking, won't that be tough since he passed away? But we went, and there he was, looking a little older, a little heavier, but pretty much the same, except his eyes were very, very shiny and black, like a crow's. Weird, because he didn't even have brown or black eyes, did he? He got me, us, whoever the other person was, to do writing exercises. And I felt like I always felt during a Weatherly session, stressed out, pushed to the limit, not good enough. The usual defenses didn't work with him. You know, finally we finished up and I left feeling put in my place in a good way. Well, there you are, Megan. That just goes to show you, just because you think someone is dead doesn't mean they actually are. Woke up with a very real sense of having him here. Or there, I suppose. And even in his silence, loudly waiting for me to get to work. And this is January by Megan. My frown fiddles with the weather, you tell me, and so I am to blame for the coming rain. We watch the lowering cloud outside the window move into the branches of the elm and wait. Sure enough, within seconds, a fantastic clatter of pebbles on the roof. A sandstorm of hailstones turn tight and rough. We run to the door to watch the earth fall from the sky and land at our feet, a white wartime terrain. In the after-storm still, you disappear through that door to bend across the flower bed, and then the sidewalk to scrape the melting shreds into a paper cup. When you return, you hand me the cupful of white bullets with the smile of a long-departed conqueror, of a traveler come home. You smile all that afternoon as we nibble the hailstones like popcorn with our iced fingers, tasting roots and dirt and footprints, and the rain I birthed by accident. Now this is the sample exercise that Weatherly just dashed off. That are tunes, dear heart. If heartfelt belly grooves, they move the head and arms. Truly Western art when you move those parts of you, a Celtic, marvelous, harlot, ruthless, legendary. Megan Buckley worked in publishing in New York before moving to Ireland to complete an MA in writing and a PhD in English, which she received from the National University of Ireland in Galway in 2013. And Weatherly worked with her between 2002 and 2004. Her poems have been published in journals and other formats in Ireland, the US, and the UK. Thank you.
Joe Ritchie will read a short excerpt from the 2009 Weatherly Report, which he sent out to friends and others.
I didn't always read it, but I always loved seeing the Weatherly Report in my inbox. And the subject of this specific one always was explained to me at some point by my mom, and always continually revived my interest in Judaism, as he constantly did for me every time I saw him. I believe that all poems are found poems. Know that not the right image. Limn the language as a massive stone, perhaps a stone mountain. Then each poem carved out of the stone. Yet each poem does not diminish the conceptual stone. Kept tweaking the poem for Vivian Gornick, decided to stop. Here is the result. Gotta stop sometime. Admit my powers as a poet, a severe lack, and just live with the result. Theodicy, the branch of theology that defends God's goodness and justice in the face of the existence of evil. Seedy daisy, lands weeds, daily grief, woman agree, is theodicy, sods giddy, oxeye image, labia image, divinity is. Is equals I was, I am, I will be. I say, remember my argument that we speak the tetragrammaton, Yahweh, with inhale, first syllable, second syllable, exhale. Is always is, whether, past, present, future. Good, hey, good, hey. 5, 6, 5, 10. Gematria 26, full 42. God is everything, all existence, all self-creation. And I mean more than just this universe. God is, was, is, will be. I tell you this to prepare you to read my religious poems. You will see them someday. I translate Yahweh as is, I am, a little funning with this, and exhale, inhale. The latter is the pronunciation that we daily say. I'm asked, why use God? It is tainted. I want to unify all Torah, Tanakh, and science. Read beyond the naive of ancient Hebrews, follow the evolution toward ethical monotheism, and see that Judaism is an Asian religion. Christianity is Western mostly. Islam is having a troubled puberty. The mystics and all are close. Thank you.
Ken Jackowitz and Gilda Conrad will read a brief note sent from California from Steve Landau and Beth Lieberman.
I'm sorry, I'm just gonna take a moment to talk about Weatherly, because everyone else has. I'm kind of unique here. I'm the only non-poet Strand employee who's speaking. And I worked here from 1988 to 1995, when Strand was more of a free-range zoo without bars for Lower East Side and just New York City character. That says a lot about Fred Bass, that he hired us and kept the store running. And I met Weatherly, and pretty quickly he said that I was uncivilized. Which was something he said to other people, but he also said it a lot to me. And I mean, I knew him, and I knew what people thought of him, and literary and poems. And one day he came to me and said that I had earned his respect. And I asked Weatherly what I had done to earn his respect, and his answer was that I could take a punch. That he had socked me in the chest, and I took it, and I didn't fall over, and he could respect that about me. But I was still uncivilized. But after that, Weatherly and I had many, many great conversations, and I really enjoyed his company. And on occasion, sometimes he would say I was civilized. And that's all I can say. You want to go first?
Sure. No, you know, I shouldn't, I'll just mention something about Weatherly that, I had met Janet first and, had heard she had a husband and had never really been introduced to him and suddenly one day I was at her house and there he was, and I actually think he came to see us perform, we used to perform. And the first thing I noticed about Weatherly was, well, he's very distinguished looking, but he was also, no one has exactly mentioned this, but Weatherly was extremely charismatic, you know, a person that just drew you to him. And just very smart, and he talked a lot, but he had tremendous charisma, and it's very rare to find that in someone, and I just wanted to make sure I mentioned that. Okay, should we read that? That's part first.
I think.
I think, yeah.
Just,
But should we?
Oh, is it here? I was going to read it off my phone.
Oh, I have it.
Okay.
Oh.
Yes. Well, this is from Steve Landau and Beth Lieberman, who could not be here tonight. And I will be reading the part of Steve Landau. From Steve. Thomas and I worked together at the Strand in the early 90s. It was a much edgier place in those days. There was no air conditioning, and you couldn't search for book titles on the internet. Thomas wanted me to meet a friend of his. He was interested in making sure I met a nice Jewish woman. I was reluctant, but Weatherly lured me to his apartment by offering to share his single malt scotch, which was better than anything I was drinking at the time. The scotch was great. And then Beth walked through the door, a vision of beauty and grace. We started dating, got married 2.5 years later, and now we have 2 wonderful daughters.
Hi, I'm Beth. Our friendship grew out of our mutual love for Janet and for the work of Poet HD. If it weren't for Weatherly's support, nurturance, and prodding, he gave me my first Jewish prayer book and also ambushed me into meeting the man I married. I might never have figured out that female divinity and organized religion and marriage do mix. Thank you, my friend. Beth Lieberman is a book editor and rabbinic scholar passionate about finding the places where sacred and secular meet. Steve and Beth currently live in Los Angeles with their 2 daughters, Sarah and Hannah. Thanks to Thomas Elias Weatherly, they met and have been married for 18 years.
I skipped
Oh,
the
yes.
about Steve. Why don't you read that? You're up there already.
Okay. Steve Landau was an actor during his time at the Strand and then an actor in Los Angeles. Now he does even more interesting work in the entertainment industry. I don't know what it is.
I'd like to mention that in his inimitable Weatherly way, he didn't want me to tell Beth that I was bringing her to the house to meet a guy, and I said to him, sure, but then of course I said to Beth, brush your hair, come to my house, there's somebody waiting for you. So it worked out. We are now going to open the podium to people who would like to speak, who have not spoken before. So if you'd like to speak, please come up. Jack Brown?
I'm glad to be here tonight with Weatherly's friends and associates, and I find that I'm a relative newcomer. It was 1982 when he walked into the High-Ho Cyclery at 165 Avenue A and announced he was a poet and a bike bum, and it was the initial basis for our friendship. And I think one important thing is there are a couple bottles of wine back there, and it's not kosher, but it's okay. Help yourself. I think everybody has said a lot, and I certainly share a lot of similar things. I'm going to read two poems. One is for us, and the other is for Weatherly. And this is the first one. I call it Blue Monday, and it was written this morning, and I don't think it could have been written any other time. Today is Weatherly's birthday memorial. He was a bike bum and a poet. Died alone in Alabama, July. His soul may have been in Alabama, but his heart and mind were in New York. No one I knew like that black Jew. I'm the only human a scruffy gray cat loved, adored. She lived in a hard Scrabble cellar beneath a restaurant. Still mousing at 19, but not happy, testing, fighting, showing her concern by losing hair, fur, and dry skin. She moved indoors when an old maid in chronic malcontent reported cats in the basement. She grew comfortable. Inside, warm, safe. I've been meaning to visit for days, weeks. Today I saw her. She's dying. Don't wait too long with affairs of the heart. Sunday, a friend told me he had bad news. A mutual friend was being treated for pancreatic cancer. Same thing took my father. He finished his project on Nelson Mandela just before Mandiba went home forever. There's a gray squirrel perched on the wall. I buried his brother in the garden some time ago when they were both not much more than kids. Then Mom, Dad, brother, and I had a New Orleans funeral. Nuts all over, a scurry of squirrels. Now he brings his family, thinks he owns the backyard, and even the cats step aside when he comes looking for nuts. I try to come through for him. I know he would do the same for me. A brave Navy SEAL froze while climbing sheer rock on a mountain face. His commanding officer inched over and said, "Concentrate on the 3 feet around you. Nothing else exists. Now, reach for the next handhold." Some days are like that. Blue Monday. Now this is a poem, this one is for Weatherly, because Weatherly really liked that poem, this poem. And I guess that's high praise for me, and you'll see why, because in some way it was similar to the kinds of things he was doing later in his career. And just to set it up, we had a dialogue back and forth. I'd gone to an event symposium at NYU where poets and composers were talking about poetry and music and the difficulty they had in combining it. And Weatherly had said something years ago. I think we were standing in the shipping department, and he said the one defining thing about poetry, no matter what kind it was, he said, poetry sings. So I had been to this symposium, and quite frankly, I found those people clueless. and probably said as much. But then I began this correspondence with Weatherly, and then a group of short poems, 9-line poems, just found them. And this is the one I'll read because I guess I'm borrowing his title and his insight. It's Poetry Sings. Poetry sings when sung becomes song. Poetry sung when swung becomes swing song. Swing, swung, sing, sung, song. Thank you.
Who else is coming up?
I'm Annabelle Lee, and I first knew Weatherly in Philadelphia. There were a group of writers hanging around together, and he was pretty good friends with some of those people, and I got to know him through them. One of those people was Jeff Goldberg, who was the publisher of Contact magazine, and he published Weatherly. And he also was responsible for getting the job that I work at right now. So, you know. Another guy was Andrew Wiley, who has gone on to be a major figure in the publishing world in another way, but at that time he was a poet, strictly a poet. And then there was Victor Bacchus, and then Marty Watt. Marty Watt, a publisher who stayed in, a poet who stayed in Philadelphia a lot longer. And yeah, it was kind of a motley crew. I also learned about Weatherly from Clarence Major, who was one of the people I studied with at Sarah Lawrence, which was pretty cool to find out about this incredible wild guy in school. I also write in very short form very often and distill my work, and I have for a long time. I'm going to read one poem of mine, which he liked a lot, and which in a way was very much influenced by kind of work he writes. There are really two poets who I relate to in that way of very short work, him and a French poet named Jacques Roubaud. This poem is from back in the 70s, which was when I first knew Weatherly. Sax, show me the primitive forest, Montreux. Monkey blood runs through me. Animals walk in my shoes. Jacques Roubaud writes in 34 syllables, and that's what I usually write in. As it so happens, Sax was a poem that I wrote before I was writing in 34 syllables. It took me a while to find the form, and I only found out about Jacques Roubaud after I'd been writing 34s for about 15 years, so that was kind of cool. So I want to read one of Weatherly's poems. You can probably guess. Short history of the saxophone. Bareback rider on a boogie tune. Cat ought to transfigure the moonlight. Main man in the mind, fast, cocoon alive. Weatherly saint too soon in June. So 11 moons in 83. Prickly pear, poon leaves, backbeat boogie. To attune himself to, she's gone. Blue moon, you saw me standing alone. Moon, you saw me standing alone. Blue.
That's one of my favorite poems too. Is anyone else coming up to read before we conclude? Okay. James and yeah, okay.
Good evening. I knew Weatherly, we met in the 80s in the review department, and I'll just be brief. 3 parts. TW, what is your name? JTR, Jim. TW, no, I don't think so. What is your name on your birth certificate? JTR, James. TW, Well, that's your legal name. Jim is your nickname. Understand? From that day forward, once again, when I introduced myself to someone new, I used my surname, James, instead of my nickname, Jim, because of Weatherly's insight. 2, hot, sweaty, dusty basement bookstore where we met in review department, miles of books where we worked in the atmosphere and beyond, journey through time and space. But summer passed, you called again, a last phone call message received. I did not think time was of concern to call back right away. So when I did return your call, to no avail, found out from a message from your sister, your last breath summer passed, never a farewell conversation you wanted with me. And so we never said goodbye, my dear friend. Love you till the end. So where I am standing in the Strand Rare Book Room, reading this to those who've gathered in your honor, tribute to your life's ponderings, your life's love, your life's dreams. I thank you for sharing parts of your life with me. Will always be your friend, James, in this world and the next. And one day we will smile, pondering the cosmic solutions together and write more poetry together. And just maybe a hot, sweaty, dusty bookstore basement where we met long summers ago. And just to end, Weather and I would have long conversations, and we would always end with a poem. One would start and the other would end. We'd never say goodbye. And so I never did say goodbye to him. And so forevermore, you'll be having this eternal conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, James Romano. Arlene Rubin.
Arlene Rubin. I'm one of the people who lived in the same building where Tom lived with Janet. And I am really, really very sad as I sit here. Partly because I saw Tom talking to the doorman, and I would be going in or out saying hello, but never really speaking to him very much. Listening to all of you read some of his poetry and some of the interchanges you've had with him make me feel like I really missed a lot by not really trying to spend time talking to Tom. I do the lobby flower arranging in the building, and I do the gardening right outside the apartment house. And I remember the time when he just left some photographs for me. He had taken photos of the garden and some of the flower arrangements that he admired that I did. And I just want to thank you for all the things you said and that I learned about him that I never knew about this man. I never knew he was a poet. I knew he worked at Strand at some point. And I am really, really moved by a lot of what I've heard. So I just wanted to thank you and tell you that.
Eileen helped me make the flyer. What? You're David Henderson? Oh my goodness, hello. I've heard your name for years. David Henderson.
I just heard that Tom passed on Saturday. So, and luckily, Genji gave me the information, and that's why I'm here. I'm really sorry to see him go. You know, the last time, first, Tom's poetry is really unique, and I'm really glad to see it in this light, and I think that he will be recognized as a unique poet as time goes on, and I think part of that has to do with what I'll tell you about last, which is the archive thing that we're trying to put together that deals with Tom living downtown, as some of us did, a bunch of us African American folks did, during a time in the early 60s and 70s when there was the civil rights movement happening. When I hear that Tom was from Scottsboro, that's not where the Scottsboro boys were? Was that real?
Yes.
That's amazing. You know, nobody must have discussed this, but I think I just took it for granted because I have known Tom for a long time. The last time Tom and I spent some time together, we were both jurors. And so if you've ever been a juror, you know that you have a lot of time sitting around in that room, and we had a good chance to talk and to really spend a lot of time together. He was riding this little bike that I would notice when we lived at the courthouse. He would stop at every red light, as a good rider would do. And he was really believed in that bike. And I was encouraged by him to ride my own bike. He told me a story once that I thought was very interesting it was about a bike. He was riding across the Williamsburg Bridge. And these two boys attacked him. These two young men attacked him, tried to take his bike. And of course, we know that Tom, who I believe he was in what was it?
Marines.
Right, he was a SEAL, but he was also studying martial arts. He had gotten a black belt in martial arts, so he really beat those guys up. You know? And the cops thought he was great, you know, and the cops even gave him one of the guys' home address if he wanted to take it any further. But Tom figured he had beat them up enough, you know, because he was really at heart a very gentle guy, you know, and that was I always was struck by that, you know. We published Tom in Umber. We had a group called the Umber Workshop. Tom wasn't a member, but he was, like Clarence Major was not a member, but he was a spiritual brother. We all hung out together from time to time and were involved in one way or another with the formulation of the Poetry Project. We published Tom in Umber, one of the Umbers, and I am sorry that I didn't have presence of mind to actually get that issue and bring it here and read the poem that we published of his in that issue. So in terms of the Black Arts Movement, you know, I've had arguments with these people because Amiri Baraka, Leroy Jones came from downtown, and we have these discussions about this. I don't think they quite understand, many people don't understand why a bunch of black poets would stay downtown and kind of do their own thing and not be a part of being in the Black Arts Movement like many were. We were individuals who believed in having our own relationships, doing our own thing, and we respected each other for that. And I thought we always thought that was important. And Tom converted to Judaism, I think, kind of points that up. And I really respect him for that because he really loved it. And it helped me to understand it better. But I had hung out with some guys who found this rabbi who was teaching them Kabbalah, and they would tell me about it, and they were really cool, so I was down with that, and I thought that was a cool thing. So anyway, we're doing this archive thing. We're going to try to tell stories. I hope that there will be an archive of his, that all of these comments hopefully are recorded and will be somewhere so that people can tune in on them and find out what it was like for someone like Tom, who was like great, and I'm glad to hear how much he was loved by so many. Thank you.
We are on a live YouTube feed right now, and it will be posted on the Strand's website so that you can go back and watch it again and again. Yes, please come up. While we're waiting, true or false? He was tapped to run for Congress on the Republican Party on the Lower East Side against Bella Abzug because they just needed somebody who'd be willing to lose. He declined. True or false? Somebody will tell me later. Madeline Tiger. This is the poet Madeline Tiger.
I had meant to send in a poem or a suggestion for a reading, but I just never got to it because I felt kind of disconnected. And being here tonight makes me want to thank you for bringing me into Kith and Kin, for having me join in. I've been separated for a long time, but I was very much with Tom for what I think was a long time, but I was not a Strand chapter. I was not part of your weddings or the babies. We were both writing poems, but I don't think I ever wrote poems like his. He probably influenced me somehow. I don't even remember whether he even liked my poems, but he liked that I was right. He did?
Yes.
He did like them?
He did.
Thank you.
He did. Most of the time.
I didn't know that. But I liked his poems, even when I couldn't understand them. They jolted me with a kind of excitement. And I guess I proselytized him too. I certainly took him around to many friends and family who were sort of surprised to see me with such a person. I think I was sitting back there and I suddenly realized I was his suburban chapter. And I think that's just true, but now I feel very much a part of you. And seeing these pictures and seeing some of the poems I remembered up there and knowing what all of you are saying makes me feel so much more part of it. And it makes me dare to read something that I found folded in the bulletin you had sent me. I don't remember why I put it in there, and I'm not even sure whether I wrote it when I was with him. I don't remember what our chapter was. I have 1975 on this poem, but it might have been earlier. Does anybody here know? Ben would know.
Earlier.
It was earlier. When was it, Ben?
We were in 74, I met you.
Oh, well, then I was with him then, probably, yes. Yeah, because that's when we knew each other. Well, I'll just read a few lines, and you can see how different we were, but you can see how I wanted to sing. I don't really write like this anymore. Lemon Sky, this is called, a ballad for summer. Lemon sky, summer is a season just so sweet. You have had to put up with my sails. I have had to bury your feet. The sea released tight little clams, snails, and nuggets of coal. I was a scallop shell. You were a scavenger tall. That's how I think it must have referred to him when it said you were a scavenger tall, because he was probably the tallest man I was ever with, practically the tallest person I know. You were a scavenger tall. Tall and bending in half to pick green and gold from the sand. Only a shadow can eat what washes into its hand. Oh, lemon sky, oh, solstice, summer is season too sweet. Dark boys dance like towers. Cornflowers open at night. I taste the salt and the citrus. The skyline turns red and dips. Sweet summer commits a treason, leaving burnt flesh and salt on the lips. So you can see how different we were, but you can see how I wanted to sing with him. And I really thank you for including me. I feel so much more part of Kith and Kin. Thank you.
Madeline, we spoke about you very fondly and often. Okay, if no one else is coming up, I have some closing remarks before we try to say Kaddish, and then a fantastic video by Madeline Kagan. Marilyn Kagan. Thank you, Steve. Okay. How to remember Thomas Elias Weatherly by making his steamed garlic chicken. First, have a fresh chicken cut into 8 pieces. Kosher, of course. Leave the skin on until after the chicken is cooked. This is not going to be company chicken or an attractive Instagram dish. The only guest who ever ate it was Frank Wooten, who had been a cook at the Lion's Head. But if you eat poultry, it is succulent and delicious. Arrange the cut-up chicken pieces in the basket of a heavy-duty steamer. Being Weatherly, had splurged on all-clad. Now cover the chicken with as many peeled cloves of elephant garlic as you can until you don't see the chicken. Tuck them under everything. Really garlic it up. Cover the pot. And did you put enough water in the big pot below the steamer? Let it cook over a medium flame for almost an hour. While the garlic chicken steams, tinker with a poem you've been fussing on for several years as you watch a rerun of Deep Space Nine, listen to Public Enemy, smoke an American Spirit, rub dead skin off your forehead, bite your nails, argue with a loved one, sip a single malt, and draw a colorful, non-objective design in the margin of the dictionary. Now the chicken is ready. Your apartment is more garlicky than Gilroy. Open the lid and remove the garlic, which is cooked to a buttery softness. Smash and spread it on good French bread. Under the garlic, the chicken will be covered in an ugly steamed skin. Remove and discard. The now cooked chicken isn't so pretty either. It's kind of grayish. No matter. You know, he didn't care about aesthetics lots of times. It's falling off the bone and infused with garlic. The chicken fat has mostly dripped through the steamer to the water below. Serve with the garlic bread and some obligatory green vegetable. You have now prepared Weatherly's steamed garlic chicken. Delicious. After dinner, widen your eyes like a cartoon character and say, "Cake! Cake! I want cake!" Bon appetit. If it's possible, I'd like us to all say the Mourner's Kaddish, and if anybody had a bar mitzvah and can read Hebrew and wants to come up here and do it with me, you're invited. Yiskadal v'yiskadash shamei rebo. Amen.
Amen.
Balmo divoro kirosei mal chusei. I feel like when he read in his Alabama accent, he read Hebrew beautifully, but haltingly. You know what? You guys do it.
V'yimru amen. V'hishmei ravav v'vorach le'olam omai yisborach. Yisborach v'yishtabat v'yishbarach v'yisbarach v'yishnaseh v'yischador v'yisaleh v'yisalo shemei v'kudasho v'rifu v'al min kol v'choroso v'yishiraso tushbechoso v'yidechnoso de'amiron v'olma v'yimaru amen. Yehesh lama rabban min shemayo v'chayim tovim v'lev v'yakol Yisrael v'yimaru amen. Osei shalom v'brava hu ya'asei shalom aleinu v'yal kol Yisrael v'yimaru amen.
Amen. Translation. We're just going to read that visually. Okay. Thank you so much for coming tonight. when we finish with Kaddish, there's a wonderful video by Marilyn Kagan.
Crossroads, Hellhound bark, voodoo bars from heaven, uncharted west blues, cargo blues, voodoo bars from heaven.
Times. Truly alone muley knows truce death music. Never muted heart knows moody root hurts. Human blows sound blues. Weatherly can be referred to in superlatives. The tallest poet for his size, as he once wrote. The most intelligent, the most talented, but also the most flaky and most exasperating. Even though he is the most exasperating, he's also the most loyal. And people who don't stick around don't understand that.
Do you think the Civil War would have happened without John Brown? No. It's one of the hundreds of forces that led to the Civil War. If you define him by the times, he's crazy. If you define him by our times, he's a visionary. It's from where you're looking. If you're black, he's a visionary, a hero. If you're white, he was a dangerous radical. He was a lot ahead of his times. If he'd been born a century later, been much more effective. I agree with John Brown. Fits into how I grew up. When I was a kid, my Uncle John was Dunnigan, and I would go to the movies, and the blacks that sit in the balcony, we used to root for the Indians. And there was a little fight between, and by custom. Oh, we love that. The Indians in that case. It used to piss off the whites who were sitting them down on the main floor.
Grind coffee berry, course to French press friend, of course, French and local. Weatherly.
The sound and image too as a trope of improvisation. It's not onomatopoeia, though may use onomatopoeia as an example, an auditory illusion. Three vowel sounds and accented syllables. Short E, breathe, as in heaven, long oo,
Macron as in blue, and umlaut A as in uncharted, cargo, and hard. Reads a melodic trace modified by different consonant sounds, thus the improvisation effect. I don't compose by sense, but by sound music, not the intellectual music one may admire yet perceive it dull. She alleged actual holy sachet evoked melody romance, actual legend way poet weaves preached wasteland poetic canon joke, holier passion rector teach, pray, who rapt attention lazy deacons. Saxophone phrase, peccant bleat, sachet weave, spoken breath fancy, peccant bleat, saxophone phrasal, sachet weave, spoken breath fancy, poem she alleges, sachet dances, Weatherly, 11/19/09, for David Amram. Crossroads, Hellhound bark, hoodoo bars from heaven, uncharted west blues, cargo blues, hoodoo bars from heaven.
Yeah.
Laptop's name is called. Yeah.